Naofumi's sword, Raphtalia. She's a companion character similarly to Goblin Slayer, Elric of Melniboné, Geralt of Rivia, and Hellboy. Naofumi is often surrounded by a cadre of allies with their own backstories and abilities and personalities. One of these is Raphtalia. She's what's known as a demi-human, which is like a human but with animal physical features. Imagine a human with a cat tail and cat ears. That's kind of like what a demi-human is. And she acts as his sword and battle because now Fumi can only use a shield. He can't pick up a weapon. So he needs someone to fight for him as a sword. That's Raphtalia. And similarly to Goblin Slayer, the shield hero, and the Fets, she survived a very traumatic event. Saw a brief glimpse of her mother and father being slaughtered by a two-headed dog monster. She saw her village destroyed by Melromark soldiers. She was sold into slavery, watched her friend be tortured to death right next to her, and was abused herself by several slave masters before being purchased by Naofumi. And this eventually changed her life forever. And this, for some reason, did not break her. Well, it did break her to an extent. She started out as... Well, to move on to character progression, she started out as a very shy, sickly, and fearful person because of her status as a slave and the trauma she endured after her enslavement, combined with the memory of her village being destroyed and her parents being killed. And the other thing I mentioned, through her adventures with Naofumi, Raphtalia was able to overcome her trauma, developed a brave personality, and retained her own morals and sanity, and would eventually go on to rebuild her village. This is something that I actually liked about her character. We saw a gradual progression with her. It was kind of brief, where we see her develop into this young woman, but it was still pretty good. I liked how she went from being this scared and shy little girl to being a very fierce warrior in her own right. And she progressed as a character from that initial debut. She developed into a woman with a personality that was bolder, opinionated, stronger-willed than she was in the beginning, and becoming fiercely protective of Naofumi. Where once there was again a shy, sickly, and fearful little girl there was now eventually would be a strong warrior who the world could not break as easily. This didn't stop at just personality. Raphtalia also grew physically and gained new swords and equipment throughout the story. I think she did. Yeah, pretty sure she gained new equipment because now Fumi learned how to make accessory equipment that would increase her abilities and stats. And she would try to influence the shield hero. Companions and allies often have influence on the protagonists, at times through banter or verbal or physical conflicts to make them see another perspective when not standing beside them in a fight or daily life. And Raphtalia fills this role adequately, I feel, often trying to make the shield hero become more heroic, albeit often being left disappointed with his personality type, because he sometimes can be scary. I'm not going to lie. Whenever I look at the things he takes delight in, he can sometimes be a scary guy. So I can't blame her for being too disappointed. I can't blame her too much. And lastly is... there is this one funny thing. Because she's a demi-human, she ages rapidly if her level goes up. So she looks like an adult in the story when really she's 12 years old. That has caused some... Well, let's just call it a heated debate, as far as I know. And I just like this because, I don't know if I think I mentioned this in one of the past videos. Most characters just get stuff handed to them, and they don't ever earn it. Raphtalia, I believe, has earned all the power she has and all the strength she has. She fought for it. She endured horrible events, which compared to stuff like what Marvel does makes it look like child's play. Like when you look at what Marvel does to their characters and look what Raphtalia went through, there's no comparison. Raphtalia had the superior backstory. And she continues to be a positive influence on Naofumi. She's one of the reasons why I think he gradually becomes less negative. He becomes more positive as time goes on. He starts to regain some of what he lost after being falsely accused. She also saved him from falling deeper into despair, which is something companions and allies sometimes do. They help the protagonist progress as a person, or help them see the light in some cases. I remember that, or they just make them see a new perspective, or they cause you to see a new side of the protagonist. This was something I remember from Final Fantasy, I think 9 or 8, where Squall and Zidane, they would sometimes show different sides of themselves depending on who he was interacting with. Like, there was this one girl who was in charge of some kind of festival. Squall tried to cheer her up, and she didn't expect that from him. She actually thought she must have looked really down or looked really pathetic for him to be taking pity on her. And Squall's just like, what's wrong? I'm not capable of being nice. And Zidane, you would just see different sides to him depending on the conversations he had with certain people, like the princess. Well, with Raphtalia now, Fumi, there is some kind of introspection with him, like how he views himself and his relationship to Raphtalia. But he sees her himself as more of a father, just filling the role her parents should be doing if they were still alive. Raphtalia doesn't really like that. She would prefer that he would see her as a grown woman, but he doesn't. So that kind of creates a funny dynamic between them. And it's just something that I'm not used to. So that's kind of another appeal to the dynamic is you get something unique. And her personality is much more caring and less I wouldn't say less pragmatic, but yeah, not as pragmatic as Naofumi. Plus, it's just funny seeing her and Philo get into arguments. And how she also interacts with the other companions. With Philo, it's like an older sister. With Melty, I can't really remember how she acted. I think they were just like friends. And she also calls people out on their bullshit sometimes. She called Motoyasu out on his bullshit for inadvertently cheating in his duel with Naofumi. He calls him out for how he seems to hate slavery, but there's no former slaves fighting beside him, and he has a two-faced princess instead, which was a pretty ballsy thing to say when the king, the princess's father, wasn't that far from, was within earshot. And the main takeaway for me with this one is I kind of just like characters who are kind of bold but not self-righteous. Plus, I like seeing gradual character progression. You saw Raphtalia go from the shy, scared little kid to a grown woman in a short amount of time to a very bold and all those other characteristics that I mentioned before woman who, like, it wasn't handed to her. She kind of earned it. Or she kind of worked towards what she becomes. And in some ways she brings out, like I mentioned before, she sometimes brings out the good in Naofumi, like when she confronts the slave master who killed her friend. She was tempted to kill him, but I think Naofumi talked her down a little, saying, is it going to make you feel better? And I think that kind of weighed somewhat on her, because her friend would still be dead regardless. Another positive thing is she's actually a love interest I can actually root for, because there are some love interests, this is true even in manga and anime, there's sometimes love interests that you're like, oh, I want this person to die. Like, or I just really hate this person. Raphtalia, not so much. She's actually someone you can root for and get behind, as well as you really wouldn't want to see anything bad happen to her. That and causes some memes to go about. That, and unlike most female characters made in the West, she's not ugly to look at. Like, she's kind of soft on the eyes. So there's also that. Thought I'd just throw that in for a last factor. I just thought I'd put that one out there for something to consider, because I think a love interest should be a full character, not just something that the protagonist pursues or eventually ends up with. They should be their own character. And Raphtalia is definitely one of those. She's a love interest that you not only feel sympathy for, but you actually want to see be happy. So I thought that was also important. I just thought, again, these are some things that I thought a writer could look at and just use use for some general idea of what they want to go for. And that's all I really have to say. Have a nice day, and remember the game was rigged from the start.